declined to give them. Then later that night, the Nexus would attack Brett in the parking lot, and they'd all beat down on him and place him in a limo and proceed to try and attempt vehicular homicide.
This is kind of suicide.
Yeah, this was a bit much.
They tried to kill Bret Hart. But, yeah, this, the whole Daniel Bryan thing, looking back on it, is just funny.
Well, it's just a big what if. Like, what if they never brought him back?
Daniel Bryan's a part of Nexus. Do we ever get the Yes Movement and all that?
I wonder how things would have been different for him. Like, there's that what if, and then there's also the what if, like, what if they never brought him back to begin with?
He wouldn't have been the baby.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have been the baby face, because he instantly became a baby face when he came back.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a big what if, actually.
Because remember, he takes the Miz's spot at SummerSlam, and it's this whole thing.
Or I guess the other thing is, like, what if he would have, like, signed elsewhere also, and then he was locked up for a bit?
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, I guess theoretically he could have came back like years down the road later on, but it still would have been like far different.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's the backstory to this show. Of course, this is WWE Fatal 4-Way 2010. This was done by World Wrestling Entertainment on June 20th, 2010. So we're just a day behind on this one. This is done from the Nassau Coliseum in Uniondale / Long Island, New York. 10,000 was the attendance figure for this one. And then the show did a buy rate of 143,000, which is down 35,000 buys from the previous year's June pay-per-view, The Bash. The brands representing this show would be Raw and SmackDown, and the commentators would be Michael Cole, Jerry Lawler, and Matt Stryker. So this is still like the beginning years of the three-man commentary teams, which I am not a huge fan of. And then the theme song for the show would be Showstopper by Toby Mac. So before the show would begin, we would have a preliminary dark match, which I just saw, so I jotted it down. Obviously, no one saw this except the people in the building, so I'm not going to go into detail about it. But it was between MVP and Zack Ryder, which would see Zack Ryder pick up the win. So that's interesting because this is like 2010 Zack Ryder. Like this is even like before he got his like push in like 2011. This is like toward the end of MVP's like I think a run with the WWE, at least the first time. Obviously he's back now, but I mean I think it was because he's in spots like this where he's like, you know, in the dark match and like not even like featured on like the actual show. I think that's kind of what led to him like leaving in later this year. So we'd open the show with the opening video package, highlighting both Fatal 4-Way matchups. They'd show that there's a 25% chance that the champion retains because, you know, there's 4 people, you know, 25%, 1/4 odds. And then in the SmackDown Fatal 4-Way, there was a point where it would transition into a part where Kane would vow to seek revenge for his brother, The Undertaker, for what had happened to him. Then we'd have the opening pyro, and we'd have Vince McMahon come out. He cut a promo by saying that he apologizes for having to start the show on such a somber note, but unfortunately the general manager of Raw, Bret Hart, will not be there. And then he'd show the attempted murder from the past Monday night show by the Nexus on Bret. From there, Vince would say that later he's meeting with Bret's representative later that night to determine when Bret will return to duty and what actions will be taken against the attackers. And then in that he hopes everyone enjoys the show. And while he's saying that, there would be a Daniel Bryan chant that would break out. And he would just casually ignore that, obviously. And then out would come Drew McIntyre for his Intercontinental Championship match against Kofi Kingston. While he was making his entrance, they'd show footage from the previous SmackDown where Drew would order SmackDown General Manager Theodore Long to lay down on the mat for him so that he could defeat him. Then afterwards, the quick victory would not be enough for Drew as he'd get Teddy up in position for the Future Shock DDT, but then out would come Kofi, who would try to get involved, but McIntyre's security would hold him back in order for Drew to get the upper hand on him. Then out from the crowd would come Matt Hardy, who would try to seek revenge on Drew. But once again, the security would get in the way, and Drew would start to beat down on Hardy as well. In the ring, McIntyre would hit the Future Shock DDT on Matt and would lay both Matt and Kofi out in the middle of the ring. Then they cut to the back, showing Vince leaving the building in his limousine. I guess that meeting with Brett's representative is so urgent that he's got to leave a pay-per-view in order to handle things right then and there.
Let me say, this Kofi Kingston and Drew match, really long to open the show.
Yes, a little lengthy.
Like, it got to a point, I thought it was good, but it got to a point towards the end, I was like, okay, that's enough, you know?
Yeah, I agree, actually.
But I thought it was good. Obviously, you know, this was heel Drew. This is when he was the future of
the chosen
WWE.
one.
The chosen one, that's what it was. You're right. It was nice to hear him come out to Broken Dreams. I like his theme now, but Broken Dreams is just a classic.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think in some ways that this was actually an underrated time period for some theme songs, because there were some good ones, actually, that we heard on the show.
I mean, the Nexus have,
The Nexus have a good one. I mean, Evan Bourne has a pretty good one. I mean, Sheamus, I prefer that one over the thing he comes out to now, for sure.
But this match, you know, obviously you had the Matt Hardy interference in it.
Yeah, before
you had Teddy. You had the Teddy spot at the end. Like I said, you'll talk about it more, but I liked it overall. I just thought it went a bit too long, but I'm sure we'll go more in depth on it with you here.
Yeah, back in the ring, before the match would begin, Drew standing in the ring. He called out the SmackDown GM, Teddy Long. As Teddy was walking toward the ring, Drew would say, "Look at you, Teddy. You're pathetic, a shell of a man. But look at the bright side, Teddy. You did the right thing. You're still collecting a check for you and your family. Shame you won't get any parade, though. Now, Teddy, I want you to sit in that chair there. So when I win back my Intercontinental Championship, I want you to hand it to me. So sit down." So then we'd have the match between Kofi and Drew. It'd be a good opening match, a little lengthy, as we've said. Look forward to nowadays where Drew's currently WWE champion. And it seemed like he was destined to be a future world champion from the get-go. But however, despite some early success, with the run with the Intercontinental title, things didn't really pan out that way. He had this program with Kofi here, which was solid. And, later in the year, he teamed with Cody, and they would actually be the tag team champs. They didn't really go anywhere with that, though. I mean, they'd win the titles, but then they didn't really go anywhere with it. Then soon he'd find himself not really being heavily featured. Then he'd be, in 3MB. He'd be out of the company by June of 2014. Then I remember he had gotten released, which I was actually kind of sad about when I heard that, just for the fact that I really felt like it was a missed opportunity. Then over the course of the next couple of years, he'd kind of find himself as Drew Galloway, having successful runs in Impact Wrestling across the independent scene. Then he returned, 2017 as part of NXT. He'd rise back up the ranks, winning the NXT title from Bobby Roode to take over Brooklyn 3. Then he'd hold on to that belt, and he'd drop it to take over War Games on Andrade. Then he'd have, the torn tricep injury. He'd be out for several months. That'd end his NXT run. Then the week after, the night after WrestleMania, he'd make his return, aligning with Dolph Ziggler. He'd appear on Raw. So that'd be his return to the main roster. Then they'd team for a bit. And it'd still take him some time before he'd, make it up to the top of the card. Then, earlier this year, January, he'd win the 2020 Men's Royal Rumble match. Then he'd face Brock at this year's Mania, which he would finally win the WWE title for the first time. As for Kofi even, he too would make it to the top as well. I mean, for years dating back to even this point, Kofi had been, here in 2010, that is, Kofi had been one of the company's top mid-card performers. Then in late 2014, him, Big E, and Xavier would form the New Day, who would become one of WWE's most popular acts for the past several years for the company. Then finally last year, 2019, Kofi would finally have his moment as a singles competitor, capturing the WWE Championship from Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 35. So with this match here, a Fatal 4-Way 2010, we're looking at two future world champions.
Yeah, it's honestly pretty crazy to think about while watching this. Obviously, at this point, we all thought Drew would be a future world champion. I don't think anybody and their mother thought Kofi was ever going to win a world title at this point, after what happened in 2009.
Yeah.
The Randy thing.
Yeah, and it's not to discredit him, obviously, but, it's just...
No, God, no. Kofi's awesome.
I mean, but as you said, there's just some guys who are just, always in that mid-card scene, and, there's been Hall of Fame talents, too, of, been in that spot.
Look at MVP. MVP should have got a world title at some point during that first run he had in WWE.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a guy like that. He
Absolutely. But, then he even got, the Roddy Pipers of the world, where, it's like he was great, but,
Jake the Snake never won a world title.
He never won a title in that company.
That's what I mean. Yeah, Jake is that's just the way it is sometimes. But talking about this match, what did we give it star-wise?
We both went with a 3. Toward the end, well, actually, no. Before we get to the end, I will say there was some good psychology that was used. There's some targeting of the limbs, and there were some plenty of near falls as well. Then toward the end, Kofi would apply a variation of a triangle choke, but Drew would toss him off, sending him into referee Charles Robinson. From there, Drew would send Kofi into the ring post and would hit him with the Future Shock DDT. He'd go for the cover, but there'd be no one to count the pin. McIntyre would try to revive the official by kicking him around, but nothing would work. Then Drew would demand for Teddy Long to get in the ring to make the count, which, not for nothing. Teddy at one point was, in fact, a referee at one point in time.
Very true.
So, I don't know if that's what they're getting at here, but that's just a quick little side fact. Drew would remove Charles' referee shirt and gave it to Teddy for him to wear. Teddy would go to count the pin. He'd count 1, 2, and would stop the count to the shock of Drew. This would set him off, as Drew himself would then look to go after the already damaged Kofi until Matt Hardy would appear again from the crowd. Matt would hit Drew with the Twist of Fate, which would stun him a bit, and then Kofi would hit him with the Trouble in Paradise and cover him for the pin. And then Teddy Long would make that 3 count, and Kofi would retain the Intercontinental title in 16 minutes and 29 seconds.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that'd be 3 stars from both of us. A good opening match. Then following that, we'd see the Hart Dynasty. Tyson Kidd and David Hart Smith, who were at the time the unified WWE Tag Team Champions, as well as Natalya. We'll talk about them later in the show as well, but all I have to say is underrated. I truly enjoyed the Hart Dynasty pairing. I thought that Tyson and Davey Boy Jr. made a pretty good team. You've got Tyson Kidd, the final graduate of the famous Hart family dungeon. You have David Hart Smith, now known as Davey Boy Smith Jr., and also known as Harry Smith, who currently works for MLW, the son of the British Bulldog. And then you have Natalya, the daughter of Jim the Anvil Neidhart. A perfect faction to pair together. So for this, they'll all be backstage for an interview with Savannah, who'd asked them if they were mentally prepared to compete in the 6-person tag match later after what had transpired 6 nights ago on Raw with Brett. Natalya would respond by saying that it's been a very hard week for the entire Hart family and that we're Harts, so we're used to adversity. And tonight we're going to make Brett proud. Tyson would say the Usos and Tamina said that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time when they were going to make a name for themselves. Well, tonight the Usos, we're going to make our name for ourselves in the ring. Then David would say, for the past 8 years, Brett has been like a father to him. He personally signed the Usos so that they could fight for everything they achieve. So Brett, on this Father's Day, we fight. Pretty baby face-ish, but I guess that's what they were going for. It's a pretty, like when they were heels in the beginning, it just, I don't know. It feels like they were better fitted as like baby faces.
Yeah, like I said, I like him a lot. We'll talk about him later in the show when they have their match. But yeah, good babyface team, really underrated.
Yeah, and when I was doing research for the show, obviously it's unfortunate, how Tyson's career ended with the injury he had sustained in 2015. But you look at Natalya, she's still going strong, a 12-year veteran of the main roster, still here today. And then, as I said, Davey Boy Jr., he's still going strong in, MLW. They're not operating right now, but before that, he was doing well there. When I was doing research, I discovered that he's actually 34. So I actually get the idea that maybe someday he could be back there, actually. It's not impossible.
He could, but, I always say this when a guy's going to come back from injury. I know you may want to do everything, but let's just make sure you're 100% safe before we actually bring you back.
Oh, you're talking about Tyson. I was talking about about David.
Man. Oh, my bad. Sorry, yeah. He's really only 34?
Yeah, so I actually feel like the door's still open for him someday.
Really? Wow, I didn't know he was only 34. Yeah, I could see. Yeah, that'd be cool.
And I also think you had pointed this out when we were going back and watching this. It's actually crazy to see how much he actually resembles his dad.
Yeah, he looks a lot like him.
Yeah, so The next, we would have the Fatal 4-Way match for the Divas Championship. It would be Eve Torres defending against Alicia Fox, Maurice, and Gail Kim.